Welcome to Valley Politics History Interviews. I'm Terry Christensen. Tom McEnery was mayor of San Jose from 1983 to 1990 and was probably best known for leading the redevelopment of downtown San Jose. Here, for the first time, is our 2017 interview with Mayor McEnery in full. And now, here's part one of our interview with Tom McEnery, mayor of San Jose in the 1980s. Tom McEnery, welcome to Valley Politics.
Thank you.
So you were elected, I think, at the age of 37, right?
Elected at 36.
Elected at 36, sworn in at 37, 8 years till 1990 as mayor. But you've had a varied career since then. What have you been doing lately?
Pretty much the same thing I was doing before, operating small businesses downtown in the San Pedro Square area. Still trying to do a little writing here and there, and you know, kind of walking the streets and enjoying the city.
What kind of writing?
I've had a couple plays recently, which I'm very pleased about. You know, I had one done in Dublin last summer on Bill Clinton's visit in the midst of the Irish peace process there, and also in the midst of the Lewinsky scandal / impeachment. So that ran for a couple weeks in Dublin, which it did okay. I won't say I took the place of any famous Irish playwrights, but I was just thrilled they produced it. And then Swift Justice, about the kidnapping and lynching in 1933, has had a couple pretty good runs here. The last one over at the Sobrato Theater. And people come and, you know, people enjoy history just like you do, Terry.
Yeah, that's great. Congratulations.
Yeah, I feel good
especially
about
on a production in Dublin. Cool.
That's the center of the world if you want to get a play up, and so that it was nice.
Let's go back in time to how you got involved in politics. I know your father and grandfathers were engaged in politics. Was the family influence? Did you always want to be mayor?
No.
No?
No, and I would think in some of my earlier endeavors, I don't think anybody would have thought that was anything. But yeah, politics. I've always been interested in history. You know, I think history is, as someone said, is a very good teacher. It can be a bad master, and you can learn from it, and you can also miss a lot of lessons. So I was always interested in history, but kind of growing up in San Jose, when the center of the world, again, in that Beaver Cleaver America, was downtown San Jose. You know, every church, every movie theater, all the major department stores. You know, watching that slowly be destroyed by a lot of processes that were gigantic and
This
a lot
is
of
in
bad.
the 1970s. Well, maybe
Well,
starting
no,
earlier.
no. Oh God, no! It started in the 50s. It was called urban redevelopment, and that was, I'd say, the fairly bad planning. You know, it had, in at least the San Jose version and in many other cities, it had no plans. It had the ability to condemn property, which is should only be done in the most extreme and positive public goods. It was used pretty casually here, and a lot of people, a lot of families were destroyed by that. So that formed, I think, part of my
I said
interest.
the 1970s because that's when I got here. And downtown by then, thanks to redevelopment, was mostly big empty parking lots.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted to park there because there was no place to go when you got here.
Right, but Terry, before you came, bad things happened even before you came. There was no direct connection there. No, it was, you know, it was the middle of the post-war boom. You know, suburbanization, obviously, every American, the dream to have their own home. You know, a lot of wonderful instincts involved in that. The way it was implemented, I think, from afar, urban redevelopment, national urban redevelopment, was a disaster in a lot of cities, and certainly San Jose would be on that list. They tore the heart out of it with no financing and no plan to do anything but just grow for growth's sake.
So that was a big part of your inspiration to run first for city council in 1980. You were appointed before that, but ran in 1980 to represent the downtown area. And then 1982, ran for mayor.
Ran for mayor, right.
What do you think your biggest accomplishment was in your 8 years as mayor? What are you most proud of?
Well, obviously, the following will be my opinion, but I think I think it's shared somewhat broadly. I think in the time I was mayor, with a good deal of assistance from people and entities we'll talk about, I think people felt better about San Jose. I think people felt that at least at City Hall, we were making the decisions instead of just willy-nilly development interest. I don't think it would be unfair to say that City Hall was pretty much run for a lot of years by outside interest, development interest. How big do you want to grow? How many houses do you want to put in place? So I think I had some pretty simple, and I think simple is important when you're running a city or really any level of government, that you have clear direction and that you let people know what they are. They can vote you up and down, and then you try to implement them.
What are some of the specific policies that help turn that pro-development attitude around?
Well, first of all, you draw a line around the city and you say, we're not going to expand any further for housing. Then you look at all the areas that hadn't been built for any jobs. As we all know, San Jose's always been tax poor, job poor.
Yeah.
That was partially geography, since Silicon Valley began on Addison Street in Palo Alto with Bill and Dave and wound its way down here. But it was coming our way, and it didn't take a rocket scientist to look at the map and see we had tremendous areas for economic development, a tax base, give people services that they deserve, cops, librarians, parks, if we didn't just allow it to go to any variety of residential uses. So that was my, when I was chairman of the Planning Commission, that was my position. When I was on the council, that was my position. For 8 years as mayor, that was my position. And if people didn't like my positions, they certainly can't say I kept them secret.
Part of that meant drawing the line at Coyote Valley too, right?
It meant drawing the line there, and we did when the Steve Jobs or I should say his first spaceship project there, we considered in the north of it doing industrial. And that for a number of reasons, the economy and Steve Jobs getting fired, took a little longer for him and Apple to finally implement that. But I think that would have been a positive for the city. But quite simply, in the 8 years I was mayor, we didn't expand a square foot for residential. We did make 1 or 2 conversions of industrial, but nothing for residential.
I thought you might cite the revival of downtown and the changes in redevelopment as your biggest accomplishment, because that's a big change that happened while you were mayor. You found more money, along with Frank Taylor, who was executive director of the redevelopment agency, and began to turn downtown around. How did that happen?
Well, I mean, I think that's implicit in what I said about making people feel better about the city. Why should our kids have to go to Oakland and San Francisco to see a concert? Why should people have to go up there to the museums? Why shouldn't we have a tech and a children's discovery museum? Why shouldn't we have an arena? Why shouldn't we have all the things that other cities have? I guess most directly it's because nobody had the willpower to push them through. And I and a pretty darn good council, I think, had the willpower to do that. And I think that continued for a number of years after me. And fairness would indicate, as I put on my historian's hat, that my predecessor, Janet Gray Hayes, who really moved the restructuring, and it was a very close vote on how we did financing in the city to help put money into highways, low-income housing, and those projects I just mentioned. Yeah, the arena was critical. To me, in 1988, I'd been mayor for 6 years. And I picked up my share of enemies, and there'd been tremendous dislocation downtown. I mean, I still think when I walk First Street and Second Street, I think about some of the merchants were there. And I had my fingerprints on some of the problems that happened to the last ones left. And to this day, it gives me a very bad feeling, because there were some great people that didn't last through that. It was similar to the massive clearance of downtown, where Harts and Hales and Farmers Union and Smiling Bill Salachis and all of these places downtown that were fantastic businesses employing thousands of people were just kind of eradicated without a thought. That happened in that period of time, but it kind of had to happen in order to move to the next phase.
So hundreds of millions of dollars invested in downtown. Do you think we got our money's worth, looking at it today?
Well, I would say, everything always has to be a comparison. When you talk about the arena, that was the final imprint on whether we're going to be Little San Jose or we're going to take a step forward. And I think you probably know that the polls before it showed there was absolutely no way it was going to pass.
Right, the weekend before.
Yeah. Now, and for 2 weeks before. 2 weeks before is when I saw the poll. We started up here and it faded. But look, I mean, you can understand it. You'd seen project after project after project.
Yeah.
Anybody who sees a government project and says, I think they're going to screw it up, they've got the wind in their back, because most government projects are screwed up. I have to say, was I nervous before that election? Absolutely. Because I would have felt it was a tremendous failure by me, I guess, to get to the crux of your question. But I never thought people would vote against it. Even when I'd speak in Willow Glen or the Rose Garden or places like that where, I had people out there that were friends of my grandmother's, friends of my parents, who would come up to me after and say, Tom, we just can't vote for this. I think it's gonna, people are gonna tailgate in the Rose Garden, or people are gonna do that.
Yeah.
And I used to, I used to try a few of, at one time I had a good sense of humor, a few jokes, that I try to loosen up the audience. And the audience sometimes in those places I mentioned were so nervous about that project because the opposition, again, had a lot of clear shots at a big government project, I felt like I was trying to put a nuclear reactor in the center of the city instead of a place that is going to be used. Remember, there was no sports team in the outing. Ice hockey was,
right.
You and I could talk about, let's put a highlight place there, and it would have been as familiar to me. But it was going to be something all the way across the spectrum of, all ethnicities, all ethnic groups would be able to use it just as they had. So when it passed, it just gave me a very, very warm feeling. So I would say I was on kind of a high cruise control for quite a while after that, because the people voted for what I thought was correct. And I think we know in some elections when people vote a different way than we think is absolutely the right way, you go, gee, how could they do that? So it continued my confidence in people in San Jose.
Why was that voted on at all? The money was from the redevelopment agency, right?
Yeah, because there was a very effective campaign how terrible this was going to be for the city, and some powerful people, even my predecessor Janet Gray was against it. And it was pretty easy to say, well, let's not put that $100 million into that. Let's do it for X, Y, Z. Well, the city budget, spends literally $1 billion on cops, on firefighters, on parks and recreation people and stuff. We basically took the cost of 2 or 3 major sewer interceptors and a couple of reactors and as our major streets, and put it into what the arena was. They say nobody voted against it if you ask them today.
I don't remember how I voted, but I'm sure I voted for it.
Did you?
Since you asked today.
Did you? Yeah.
I honestly don't remember.
Yeah. Well, I certainly hope you're correct in what you're saying today. Anyway.
I voted for it, absolutely. But it's been a huge success, so congratulations. Well, back to the arena briefly, you were in kind of an awkward position advocating for it, because one of the criticisms of you and your time as mayor was your involvement as an advocate for downtown San Jose. At the same time, you were a property owner downtown. So there was the allegation of conflict of interest. I know that came up in the arena campaign, and certainly it had come up before. How did you handle that?
Well, I think I handled it by telling the truth. My family had run small businesses down in San Pedro Square for 4 generations. Unlike the other people who decided to sell or move to Palm Springs or whatever they did, we hung in there for some pretty tough times. By the time I ran for mayor, San Pedro Square was set. We had restaurants, and the great San Pedro Square Arch, we paid for that. The city didn't pay for that. So I really think a more accurate, perhaps subjective opinion would be, and I think others might share this, is that I think I pulled up the rest of the downtown to what San Pedro Square already was. I'd add, just as an addendum, at the end of my time as mayor, San Pedro Square economically was in much worse shape than it was when I became mayor, but hey, that's people gave me the honor of being mayor, and I didn't vote on anything around there, and I'm comfortable with that.
Right, you had a conflict of interest agreement not to vote on property redevelopment funding for property in a certain circumference around.
Right.
around
And if
your
I
family
did, and if I
property.
didn't, I wouldn't have voted it anyway
Right.
because again, my family's carried a certain reputation, and I didn't want to do anything to diminish that. I think we have seen in government, when you lose any kind of moral authority, you're just contributing chink by chink to the situation we observe now today, when confidence in government at all levels, maybe not so much in cities as would be a fact, couldn't be much lower. And quite honestly, Terry, I think most people in office have richly deserved that kind of feelings toward them.
Let's go back to 1984. That's the year that city staff made some bad investments trying to make money to supplement the budget and lost, at that time it was $60 million. I don't know, the figures are a little bit different depending on how you look at it. But that was a significant hit on the city budget at that time. As a response to that, in 1986, there was a ballot measure that moved some authority away from the city manager and to the mayor. Ballot measure passed, and it gave the mayor more budget authority, more staffing authority, an Office of Policy Analysis, an Office of Public Information. It enhanced the power of the mayor. How important was that to your success in the remaining years of your term?
Well, the immediate reaction to that was shock and very little awe. We fired 11 people.
This is the reaction to the bond
loss,
money.
which happened so quickly. Believe me, one of the things I was told when I became mayor is you don't have to worry about the finance department. They really have things under control. They do things very safe, etc. You can't make this stuff up. The guy who was making most of the major investments had started issuing dog licenses in San Jose. And even though he was running a portfolio of $300 or $400 million, his knowledge hadn't succeeded much beyond where he was at the dog license stage. He used to keep track of gigantic trades, 50, 60, $80 million on a Snoopy calendar. I mean, you couldn't possibly have your confidence in the city manager form of government or your fears about the city of San Jose's competence any more shaken than it was then. I was mayor, I was responsible. I decided then, and that was reinforced in 1986, that the power ought to be where the accountability is, and that's in the mayor's office. The citizens agreed, and that's what happened. As a postscript to that, it's a little bit like finding out Francisco Franco is still alive and running some country in South America. The very same traders who were involved in San Jose's loss of that $60 million then did exactly the same thing with the treasurer of Orange County in the early 90s when Orange County went bankrupt.
Yeah.
So once again, government is very slow in learning.
Do you think that was enough? The additional powers for the mayor's office, do you think that was enough? Do you think we should go fully to a strong mayor form of government?
Who's the city manager now, Terry?
Dave Sykes.
Okay, and you know that because
I
was
read
in the paper today.
Yeah.
You follow.
Yeah.
I would ask.
Most people don't.
I would
right.
ask the rest of the people in this room or anybody on the street, and if 1 out of 10 knew, I'll buy you lunch. The power should not be in that type of an unelected official. Unlike Congress or the state legislature, a mayor is somebody who's close to you. I thought some of the best feedback I ever got was standing in a movie line or at a high school basketball game, when people would come up and say, and 90% of the time it would be something positive, because people are generally good and generous and kind of respect you, particularly in something like that. And some of the time it was, I really think you made a mistake over here. I think that's pretty healthy. You know, how many times do you think a congressperson or a state legislator gets that? How often do you think any governor or president gets that?
Well, almost never.
That's my point. Yeah, I really think.
But still, the manager appoints the police chief, the fire chief, council, and the mayor ratify the appointment. But do you think that power should be in the office of the mayor?
Absolutely.
Appointing department heads? Yeah, so it should be more.
Absolutely. You know, as I once said to a city manager, the only thing you know about crime and traffic and things in that area is what you know driving down Heading Street to City Hall. And I didn't mean that as a joke when I said it, because the one department that above all others I find important in the city is the police department.
Yeah.
Why? Because you can't have good parks, you can't have good school districts, you can't have the feelings that we used to have at one time in America without a police department that's in and of the people. And I think most people would agree my police chief for 8 years, Joe McEnery, was one of the best, and our police department exceptional, particularly at the middle management level. So I poured tremendous resources into them. We had a business tax increase when I was mayor that added more police officers, not the nonsense that President Clinton did, where he gave cities certain amounts of new officers, but the mayors prior to that, including here, took out police officers out of the budget, so there was really no increase. So it's that kind of shell game that city managers always have played, because frankly they just don't see the importance of a police department. And you know, mayors do, because they're close to the people, and if they're not close to the people, they can get jobs in you know, television or news or something.
Well, speaking of close to the people, some of the people you were alleged not to be close to included the minority community, even though you won the East Side both times you ran for mayor. But there were criticisms of insensitivity to minority issues. There were issues about displacement of minority residents for a couple of redevelopment projects. What's your response to that?
You know, I think you said earlier in one of your questions that that was a common criticism of me. It's kind of like what you say about common sense. It's not very common. I never felt that. We can get to one issue on statutes that I know you want to talk about, but you know, I won all those districts. You know, I went to schools, as my family did, in downtown San Jose, which is about as diversified. They were Catholic schools. But they were as diversified with Mexican-American kids and Filipino kids as anywhere you can find. I live in that kind of neighborhood. So I won't say, as no one can really say, that I understand exactly all of their needs. But I think if you're adding police and parks and recreation officers and museums and trying to provide jobs, you know, whatever that criticism is, you know, I think I'm perfectly comfortable with both the criticism and the people who feel strongly about it.
Well, let's get to the statue, because that was an issue relating to minority concerns, and statues are in the news right now. So this was the Thomas Fallon statue, which stands quite near our studios here at CreaTV. What was that about?
You know, essentially it was about a history program that was going to involve a San Jose history through the Native American, Spanish, Mexican, Californian, and American period. We had a group of teachers that had sat down, some of the foremost historians that you knew well, Leonard McKay, Clyde Arbuckle, that had a program, because history is very important to me. You know, I see history as something to unite, to inspire people, and to learn lessons from. You know, even the best and the brightest can learn lessons from history. And it's important to learn those lessons well. So getting that program in place was really important to what I wanted to do in my last years as mayor. It hit a pretty big stumbling block with the erection of the Fallon statue. My daughter actually did a documentary that was on PBS. Did you ever see that?
No.
You've got to catch up on some of your PBS stuff, and it was in a couple film festivals. I'll just give you the tagline. How can raising the American flag be controversial in America? We know what flags are very controversial. You know, we see them all the time, and quite recently. how can raising the flag when the majority of people in San Jose felt fairly positive about that in 1846? I think it's kind of summarized by one council member in the midst of the controversy when Captain Fallon, who maybe had some warts like many of the founders of our nation had, and many current people in office also have, that it was pretty clear that they didn't understand the history. One council member asked me, well, when they raised the flag here in downtown San Jose, how many people here were killed? I said, actually, that's pretty easy to estimate because it was zero.
Yeah.
Because Fallon, who raised the flag, was married into the Castro family. I guess you can say his kids were the beginning of the assimilation of what we had in San Jose then and what really e pluribus unum is. But it was so twisted in the alarmist and so misunderstood by people that should have known a little bit more about history that when they were comparing him to quote unquote Hitler and Stalin, it found a ready audience. I thought if we just let it go and gave it to a historical commission to set up some more statues, you know, we had statues to each of the periods that were going to go there. The Native American, they're on the bridge over on San Fernando Street. We never got to the Spanish period. We never got to the Mexican period. Fallon finally came out of the Witness Assistance Program. Incidentally,
The statue was put into storage for a while after the controversy.
It cost $400,000, which is almost more than the statue. But there was such a misunderstanding about history there that, you know, it offended me, but I thought we could move forward and then move forward with the other parts of the history program. They all died with that, so that was a great disappointment. And I think, as you'll note, every piece of art now, and some of them I kind of like, but they're all tinker toys and toy animals and stuff. And if that's the best we can do to honor history in San Jose, it's kind of a sad ending. So.
Well, let me ask you about another historical moment. So you ran for Congress in 1994. When you left office as mayor, your popularity rating was 60+%. According to the Mercury News poll, you ran for Congress in 1994 and lost to Zoe Lofgren, who's still there. What do you think happened in that election? And are you sorry now that you didn't have a career in Congress?
Well, the first part of that's pretty easy. She had more votes.
Oh, okay.
The second part is I'm very surprised at you as a historian that you haven't done your research better.
Yes.
Do you really think I would have stayed in Congress for 20 years?
No, I really don't.
No, I think at that juncture, you know, I'd finished being mayor. I'd been able to teach at Santa Clara. With my academic record, I was a presidential fellow there, which is pretty extraordinary. Thank God that academic record wasn't analyzed. And I taught at Stanford for a while. And there was just a window of time. You know, we had a wonderful person in Congress for many years, Don Edwards, who you knew. I thought I had some things to say about cities and about political reform. You know, political reform, who you haven't mentioned. Term limits I supported, even for myself. A lot of people support them after they're out of office for other people. Revolving doors, gifts. I laugh in not a pleasant way that they have a discussion now at the City Council whether to have $400 or $200. We had a simpler rule. No gifts, period. You're not in there to get gifts from people. And if you get gifts, they should be from family members and close friends who you've known for about 30 years, not people who you met in office. So there was a lot of reforms, including the types of things we talked about, and I've continued to push for. Term limits, incredibly important. I really think we'd have a better system of government, more consistent with the founders of the country, if people didn't think that they were absolutely irreplaceable. Even in some of my most buoyant days, I never thought I was irreplaceable. You know, I had an old aunt in Ireland that I kind of got into this type of discussion with, and she looked at me and said, "Tommy, there's a lot of irreplaceable people in the cemetery." And I think more people in elective office ought to understand that a little bit.
Well, Tom, we're almost out of time, but tell us what's next for you. What's the next project?
You know, just continue continue a little bit writing. You know, running the small businesses down. San Pedro Square Market is a source of great satisfaction
Should be.
to me.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
Took a long time,
Feel
but it got there.
Yeah, you know what they say, you know, the Hollywood actor who finally got the Academy Award, he's overnight success in 40 years. So we did the Peralta Adobe in 1975-76, and the San Pedro Square Market opened around it in 2011. So, you know, Terry, you're a historian too. You know, you look at the long scope of history. Yeah, I like to think it bends toward good things, and you know, hopefully that'll be continuing what we see in San Jose.
For other interviews with the leaders and activists who shaped the history of San Jose and Santa Clara County, look for the Valley Politics History interviews on YouTube.